Hello and welcome to History from 1. So this is the first topic in history that we are going to encounter. And in history there are a number of topics, but this one is the very first one, and it is about the study of history. The study of history. So in this topic we are going to look at a number of things like the definition of history, the types of history, the sources of history, and many other aspects. So we'll analyze history. What is a history as a subject of study? So let's be together as we go through this wonderful subject in Form 1. Now, what is history? Let us look at the definition of history. Now, when we talk of history, it is the study of the past and the present events in a society from one generation to another. It is the study of past and present events. Past and present events in a society from one generation to another. So as you can see there, we are talking of events. The major thing is the events, the study of events. So what are those events? The events of the past, even the events of the present. So that study is carried through from one generation to another. So in that way, we have a definition of history, the study of events, past and present events. What about a historian? Who is a historian? When we talk of a historian, we mean a person who studies and writes about history. A person who studies and writes about history. So that one is a historian. Now let's look at the types of history. Having looked at the definition of history and who is a historian, now let's look at the types of history. So when we talk of history, basically there are 5 types of history. So we're going to look at about 5 types of history that we're going to look at. The first one is prehistory. Prehistory. Now when we talk of prehistory, it is the period when writing was not yet invented. The period when writing was not yet invented, when people were unable to read and write, that we study events of that particular time. So when we study that period, it is prehistory. So people passed on information about the past orally. So what we mean is that they pass information orally by the words of the mouth, passing information from one person to the other just orally by talking to the other person to say, oh, you know, this village, we came from Zaire. We traveled from this way, we used this route, but there's no book that is talking about their travel or their origin. It's just orally, the oral. There are those things in the villages there. We see at home sometimes we are told many things about us, about our origins, but there are no books about them. So that is prehistory. Political history. Political history is another type. It deals with the information related to the administration of societies, kingdoms, and states. So political history, it's about the administration of society, the administration of society, how the kingdoms or states or countries were being managed. That one is political history. We are still looking at the types. Now, the third one is the the economic history. Economic history. When we talk of economic history, this one, it deals with information on proper ways of sustaining life among people in different societies. For example, we talk of trade, fishing, hunting, smelting, pastoralism. It deals with information on proper ways of sustaining life, how the people were sustaining their lives, how they were living. So that is the activities that people were doing. For example, trade, fishing, hunting, smelting, that is making of tools, and pastoralism, that is the keeping of animals. So we study those things. How were the people of a particular area sustaining their lives? So we study economic history. Then there is this one, social history. The social history, this one, it deals with the aspects of people like music, dance, buildings, and religion. So, for example, we may talk things like to say before any man lived in caves and used the stone tools. So social history is about the aspects, the way people were doing their social things, what they were, how they were identified. That is the culture of the people. That's when it comes to music, studying the music, studying the dance, the buildings, and many other things. And we have also environmental history. Environmental history, this one, it also deals with the interrelationship between human beings and their surroundings. As you know, environment, that is the surrounding of the people, the habitat where we live, and its surrounding, the surrounding is called the environment. So what was the interrelationship between human beings and their surroundings? So, for example, we talk of people move from one area to another to look for fertile land for farming. So that is the environmental history, to say there are some circumstances in the environment that can force a certain culture or a certain thing or a certain event to happen, to travel. As we have started learning about this history, when it comes to Form 2, Form 3, we'll be learning about maybe the migration of people from one place to the other, like the Yao, like the Ngoni, like the Maravi, the Tumbuka. They migrated from somewhere to come to Malawi. There were events surrounding their migration. That one, we talk of environmental history, to say what were the circumstances in the environment that were taking place, that were forcing some events to happen. So that is the environmental history. Now, having looked at the types of history, it's high time now we look at the sources. The sources of history. What are the sources of history? So, when you talk of sources of history, it is a way through which a historian acquires the proper information about the past. How do historians get information? So historians, they gather information through various ways. So those ways are called the sources of history. So we are going to learn about such things. So there are three sources of history. So these are oral or remembered source. Oral source or remembered. Oral or remembered source of history. What is this? This one, the information is passed on from parents to children by the word of the mouth, e.g., when we talk of the folk tales, poems, the songs, legends, myths, proverbs, and many others. When we sing songs about the past, that one, it is like relating the history, talking about the past in songs, in poems, and legends. So that is oral source. You cannot find a book, but you only sing a song about that and you know what happened in the past. And what are the advantages of oral sources? The history of the mouth. the history of the proverbs, the history of the folk tales. We hear about the folk tales. Kare kare, kunali wakuti, ankatero, ankati chane. In that way, that is the oral source. What is the advantages? What are the advantages of oral sources? It is cheap in the sense that no money is used to keep the information. You don't need money to keep this information because it is passed on automatically through songs and the folk tales. So we see to it that there is no need to have money to use this oral source. And it may give information about the past before writing was invented. As we have already pointed out, there is that type of history, prehistory, when there was no writing or reading. How do we know about that? It is through the oral sources, whereby we know about the past through the songs, through the folktales, through the proverbs. And also, it is very easy to remember. It is very easy to remember. It is easy to remember the things that happened. The information also has a wide outreach as it is not limited to a few literate people. So this information can be accessed by anyone who is able to hear, who can speak and understand. That one can keep or can have that information and transfer it. It doesn't require someone to go to school and become literate to be able to read and write. No. And also the learner or listener has a chance to interrupt and ask questions for clarification. When this history is taking place, oral source, when someone is narrating what happened, you are free to stop him and ask the question to say, excuse me, but what about this? What happened there? Then there is that clarification there. But there are some disadvantages. What are the disadvantages of the oral sources of history? Firstly, people can mess up, can destroy the information by either altering or exaggerating it. People can exaggerate, Sometimes when you hear about, maybe they are talking about a certain gentleman, they are presenting it as if that one was a giant, very powerful person like that. But in reality, he was just an ordinary person. So people can mess up information or can exaggerate or can change. To alter is to change. They can change. And it can easily be forgotten. Much as someone can remember, but you find that in the passage of time, people can forget. So it can easily be forgotten. The storyteller may be biased in a particular society or events. So the storyteller has got a stand. The one who is telling you the events has got his or her own conclusions or his own stand. So when he, for example, is talking about a conflict between two societies, he has or she has a society which she can favor. In that way, she can be biased. He can be biased in a particular societies or events. Can favor or can talk better, much better of a particular thing than the other. That one is to be biased. And it has few information to narrate. It has few information to narrate it. It has few information to narrate it. So there is not much in oral history. The second one is the oral, the written. After the oral source, now we come to the written source of history, which is called the written history. It is a collection of past records written down in books, newspapers, after writing was invented. So this one, it is a collection of past records, past events written down in books, newspapers, magazines, and the like after writing was invented. So some of the records could be from photographs or electronic form. For example, we talk of films that are public and private videos, they can be there. So all those things, they fall under the written one. The videos, they are under the written source, the written source. So the information is usually stored in, for example, we talk of the museums, the archives. Archives is the place, an archive is a place where we store information of the past. The archives, the libraries, that's where we keep the sources, the written sources. The newspapers that are not in use, you know, the newspapers, they are just for a day. So all those things, they are kept in the archives, What are the advantages? What are the advantages of the written sources of history? Number one, it is easy to keep in books than in human mind. As we have said, there is oral source whereby information is kept in your mind, in your brain. But when we talk of this one now, it is easy to keep. The information written on books, it is easy to keep than on the mind, because the mind, you feed on a lot of things and it's easy for you to forget. The information can be found anywhere since books can easily be transported. So books can easily be transported. Hence, information can be found anywhere. Information cannot easily be altered, or exaggerated, cannot be altered or changed or exaggerated. That is, to be amplified, to add more sugar so that it sounds good. So the information cannot easily be altered or changed or exaggerated when written in books. In books, usually information is written just as it had happened. What are the disadvantages of written sources of history? It is limited only to those who can read and write. The literate people, those people who can read and write, are the ones who can access information. That is this written source of history. Books are expensive to buy. Much as only those people who have gone to school can access that written history, also books are expensive to buy. You know, books are very, very expensive. On the other hand, that is why we have sometimes resorted to different ways of keeping information, because you find that the books are expensive to access. Original books, they are very expensive. So with that, then it's a disadvantage. And again, mistake may take a long time to get corrected after the book is published. So if the book has been published, has been produced into the market, and that book, it has been found that it has got an error or a mistake, that one can take long to correct, because already the books cannot be recorded to say, bring back the books, let us change that information. So it may take time unless they produce maybe the second edition of that book. It requires great care. It requires great care in order to safeguard against water and bad weather. So there is need for great care to safeguard against the weather conditions or water. Archaeological source or digging history. Digging history is another source of history. What is archaeology? We have said archaeological source. So archaeology, when we talk of archaeology, it is the study of the excavated. Excavate is to dig out materials such as artifacts and fossils. Artifacts and fossils, the dug out materials that were used by or maybe other people in the past. So that one is archaeological source of history. We have talked of the artifacts and the fossils. So what are artifacts? The artifacts, they are objects used by people in the past. The objects used by people in the past. Those are called the artifacts. A person who studies the dug out materials is called an archaeologist. Remember, we are looking at the archaeological sources. So we are saying that the people who dig out the artifacts are called the archaeologists. Archaeologists are the ones who study archaeology. An archaeologist finds out dates and data of artifacts and fossils using a method called carbon-14 dating method, that is the radioactive material. So they use a method of dating which is called carbon-14 dating method to find the dates when they have found out the artifacts they were digging out, and they have found out the object that was used in the past. The first thing is to find out when was this thing used. So how do they do that? They use the carbon-14 dating method. The carbon-14 dating method. This is the process, that is the carbon-14. It is the process measuring the amount of carbon released by the fossils. Amount of carbon released by the fossils. That is that process of measuring the carbon is the carbon-14 dating. The released carbon tells the approximate years the object has been in existence. So the released carbon from that artifact, that one, it tells the archaeologist to say this artifact has been there for so much years. It is used to study events during the prehistoric times. So this one, the carbon-14 method, usually you can use it to study the things, the artifacts that were used in the prehistory. Remember, before written and writing and reading was invented. Therefore, people were using things. So how do we know the age of those materials? So we use carbon-14 dating method. What are the disadvantages or advantages of archaeological sources of history? It gives evidence of human settlement. It gives evidence of human settlements and socio-economic activities. There is an evidence. When you find an artifact, it gives you an evidence to say, all right, the people lived here maybe in 50 BC. And these people, they were using these materials who were living here. So it is an evidence of settlement and economic, socio-economic activities, what people were doing. Is it hunting? Is it fishing? And whatever. And also, archaeology, it also helps. It helps to tell us how ancient human beings looked like. It can also tell us how ancient human beings were looking at or looking like, just studying maybe the skulls or the skeletons or the bones of the past. And it also helps us to estimate the date of the artifacts and the fossils. So through archaeology, we are able to estimate when the fossils or the artifacts were being in use. So in that way, we are able to estimate the time or the date when those things were there. But what are the disadvantages? Disadvantages of the archaeological sources of history. It is very expensive to access information as the laboratory materials needs a lot of money. We're talking of carbon-14. It means when you find an artifact, it has to go to the laboratory. There then, using the laboratory materials there, it is very expensive. So it is expensive. The archaeological history is expensive. Because once you find an artifact, on its own, it cannot tell you anything. But you have to go with it to the lab in order to at least make the suggestions. Because the first thing is to find the date. When was this thing in use? and suggest maybe other uses to say, right, this thing, what was it used for? It means, and make the conclusion. So conclusions of the archaeological sources are made in the laboratory, hence the lab materials are very expensive. It cannot give us the information on the invisible aspects such as language, music, oral traditions. It cannot tell you the proverbs, the folktales that people, or the songs that people were singing there. So the non-material culture cannot be told by archaeology. And it cannot tell reasons behind each event on the society. It cannot tell you the reasons behind each event on the society. So it cannot explain every detail of the events that were taking place at that archaeological site. The interpretation of the artifacts is mostly subjective because the conclusions are made by the archaeologist to say, all right, we have found this. Therefore, it means this one may suggest that the people, maybe they were trading or they were hunting or they were farming. But it cannot really tell you to say the exact thing that the artifacts are suggesting. So hence they are subjective. The interpretation is subjective. Now let us look at the classification of historical sources. The classes of historical sources. So historical sources are classified. What are those classes of historical sources? So there are three classes of historical sources. Primary source, secondary source, and mixed sources. So we are going to explain further on these things to say what are these classes talking about. So we talk about the primary source, the secondary source, and the mixed sources. The primary source. This is when historical information is being presented by an eyewitness. Someone who was there is the one who is telling the historical information or the event. So that one is a primary source. And it can be presented in form of letters, diaries, autobiographies, and books. A book can be written by someone who was there. Then we see that, yes, this historical event was really true. For example, I like the book, like the biblical book of Luke. The book of Luke, when you read the first part there, Luke is saying that these are the events that took place because he was there. He was the eyewitness of those things. So sometimes the people who are writing, they introduce themselves to say, I was there. So it can be book. So not every book is a primary source because like the textbooks that we use in school, historical textbooks, the ones who wrote those books, they were not there when those events were taking place. So that one is not an eye or a primary source, but books written by the one who witnessed the event. Secondary source. So this refers to historical information reported by a person who may have heard or read from a primary source. So someone can hear from the primary source. For example, I was talking of the textbooks in school that we use. Those ones, the ones who write, they use sometimes the primary sources of history or books that were written by the eyewitnesses of events. So with that then, the books, they become the secondary source. So it is also referred to as second-hand reports. What about the mixed sources? The mixed sources, this one, it is when someone gives any historical information after referring to the primary and secondary source. So the mixed source is when someone gives a historical information after referring to the primary and secondary source. So someone may refer to the secondary as well as to the primary. That one is a mixed source of history. Now, having looked at history, types of history, sources of history, classes of sources of history, now it is now necessary for us to look at the reasons why we should study history. Why should we study history? Why is it necessary to study history? So there are a number of reasons why we should study history. The first one is to avoid the past mistakes, to avoid making the past mistakes. So if we don't study the past, we are bound to make the same mistakes made by those in the past who lived before us. People, we have heard that so many people, they have made many mistakes in the past. If we don't study history, we're going to repeat those mistakes. So we need to avoid making the past mistakes. So we have to study history in order not to repeat the same mistakes made by those who were in the past. The second reason why we should study history is to ensure national unity and identity. On this one, for example, we talk of Malawi has different ethnic groups that migrated from different areas. For example, the Tumbuka from Tanzania, the Chewa from Congo, the Yao and the Lomwe from Mozambique, and the Ngoni from South Africa. See, Malawi is made up of people who migrated from somewhere, and we are the people who have made Malawi. So for us to understand national unity, that yes, we are no longer Tanzanians. We are no longer South Africans. We are no longer Mozambicans, but we are Malawians. Now, we have to make sure that we are united, knowing that where we came from, we know where we came from, and we have decided to live together here. So, to ensure national unity and identity, to know who we are, so that we live together in unity. So Malawi is a united country made up of different ethnic groups who migrated from different places at some point in time. We are no longer going back to Tanzania. We are no longer going back to Mozambique. We are no longer going back to South Africa. But we are here. Even the Chewa are no longer going back to Congo. No one is going back. But we are Malawians. We are here. So we have to know that identity so that we foster national unity. All these groups, they need to tolerate each other as they all migrate from foreign lands into Malawi. So we need to tolerate each other. Not seeing a Tumbuka, a Tumbuka ao. Seeing a ao, ayao ao. Seeing a Chewa, la Chewa ao namwe. Elomwe, ao mbalomwe ao. Alomwe ao, mulako. No. National unity. We have to know that at one point in time, we were not here. We were all out. But our forefathers, they migrated for the reasons known better to them. Then we are all called Malawians. So we need to tolerate each other. We need to live together. A Tumbuka and a Yao living together as a Malawian. We do not have another Malawian. Another Malawi is one Malawi. And this Malawi is made up of different ethnic groups who migrated from different areas. The third reason we should study history is to plan the future needs of our society. We need to plan the future needs of our society. So history makes it possible for us to plan for future needs of our societies. After studying, if a country knows its population growth rate, it will be able to plan for social services required for the nation. So if a country knows the population growth rate, to say how is the population growing, then we have to plan to say, all right, there will be so many schools needed, or so much hospitals needed, so much roads needed, so much electricity needed, so much services required for the people to grow. So to plan for the future needs of the society, we need to study history. History should not be neglected at all cost. At all cost. History cannot be neglected. Yes, we may say we need to rely much on science. Science is life. Yes, science improves our life. But our life is nothing if we lose our identity, if we don't know who we are. Hence, we can be lost. So, history cannot be neglected at any point. Even at a family level, we need not to neglect the history, knowing who we are. And also to learn from the achievements of others. We study history to learn what others have achieved, so that we also do fight for the same. So if people elsewhere made great success from empowering the population with knowledge, skills, attitudes, we can learn from their success story and develop ourselves. So we have to learn the achievement of others. How do we learn? Through history. We study a particular society, or maybe let's study the history of America. If someone studies the history of America and says, if America did this, how? What can hinder us to do that? Then they start impacting people with knowledge, relevant knowledge, just as America did, the skills, just as America did, the attitude, just as America did. Then we can learn how our friends became successful and also develop the same ourselves. Also, history is the foundation of many exciting careers. There are so many careers outside there because of history. After studying history, you can also enter into various exciting careers. What are these? It tells us more about broadcasting or journalism. Broadcasting or journalism. That one, a historian can do that. Through the study of history, politics, you can enter politics, become a councillor, an MP, the president, because you study history, you know better of your society, of how events have been flourishing in Malawi. We have said that Malawi is made up of ethnic groups who traveled from different areas. Now, you have followed critically how the Yao traveled, how the Lome traveled, how the Tumbuka traveled, how the Ngoni traveled, and therefore you can become a good politician knowing who you are in your stand. And you can become a DC, a district commissioner, because you are dealing with people of a district, different tribes in a district, you know, and you have studied different tribes. Therefore, to be a DC, it will not be difficult for you to manage maybe the people of different tribes. Tourism is there. And also, human resource management is there through the study of it. And also to gain useful skills. You can also gain useful skills in or through the study of history. Number one, history offers us a number of skills like critical thinking. Also, ability to access evidence. This world is made up of a lot of facts. Some, they may sound true, but they are false. So you may develop that ability to access the evidence. Through the study of history, you may access evidence to say, all right, this one I was told by this one, but let me find out if it is really true. So through the study of history, you are able to access the evidence of a thing. And also effective writing through the writing an essay, through the writing of essays. An essay is a prose passage. You write about, or you are discussing about a particular issue, so you develop that writing skills. And also ability to recognize propaganda and bias in stories. So when you are a historian, you will be able to trace, to say, all right, yes, this person is talking to me with vigor, with power, but it is a propaganda. It is just biased towards a certain idea. That is a propaganda. It is a biased story. A twisted idea so that it should sound good. That is a propaganda or biased ideas or biased stories. So the next time we are going to look at another thing, and this one is the date and time charts and the origins of people. So this is the next part that we are going to look at. So to this far, we have looked at a number of issues as we have seen. We have looked at history. We have introduced the history at the secondary level. We have defined history, we have looked at the types of history, and also we have looked at the sources of history. We have looked at the classes of those sources of history. And not only that, we have also looked at the reasons why we should study history. So to this one, I hope now you will learn or you have learned much. If you have not, you have missed some concepts, it's just a matter of replaying the CD or replaying the video, then you'll be able to gain this information. So till next time, I wish you all the best.